My journey over MMT has been a really interesting journey, and I have learnt so much. I've gained so much new knowledge and skills about method and process, and really added to my textiles vocabulary. If I think back to my journey from joining and manipulating to my final prototypes, and then reconfiguring my prototypes in part 5 and thinking about the effect and what I'd created and re-looking at those, there's so much that has gone through my thought process and my sample making development and how I've used those techniques. This course has really given me a personal voice. I've really developed my own interest in the materials that I use, and considering what interests me as a textile student, I never before thought that I would enjoy some of the techniques that I have as much as I have, and learnt so much from them. And so thinking about printing, for example, I didn't think that I would enjoy printing as much as I did, and actually working through and looking at some of those processes and those methods and techniques for printing has really opened my eyes to how much print can be used. I still have some refining, a lot of refining to still do, and having a go, but I think it's a method I want to continue into my textile practice, and looking at how I can use and interweave mark making and drawing and printing, and then thinking about material choice. And one of the things I really saw over MMT is how things are woven in together, how I can manipulate materials and print onto them, how I can use cement and plaster, and how I can bring all of that together, how my drawing fits into it and my historical research, but actually then thinking about contemporary mark making at the same time, and everything is just woven in together by the end of MMT, which I really enjoyed bringing all of those aspects in. My research has definitely developed, and my skills for researching and actually seeing the value in it has really developed over the course. A moment for me was discovering the Japanese technique of borrow, that actually seeing how that could fit into my printing and how that could then fit into my sample making and my patchwork making and my material choice really inspired me. So much so that actually now I've begun ideas and processes, some of those elements are weaving their way into that course, because it's become part of what I've liked and who I am now, I guess, as a textile student. And one of the things that I really liked about this course was how I discovered myself, first of all, materials that I never would have thought would have been classed as textile materials. I never would have thought about using cement in the garden, batch making it and moulding and casting from it and actually creating textile samples. And so that's really kind of opened my eyes to it. But also seeing materials, and this is kind of where the borrow technique comes in, seeing materials that are functional but can be decorative at the same time, and looking at the cement that's heavy and very structural and used for a very structural reason, a very practical reason, but actually can be playful as well, and I can get my yarn stuck into it and it becomes hairy, and I can cast with it and hang it and drape it and see what happens to the setting process, and use the plaster to recreate something so delicate like the bubble wrap, and so thin and so fragile. Yeah, I never would have thought that material that you use to cast with or to cover things or to put on a broken arm, for example, the plaster of Paris, that I could get it to that extreme length, and I could play around with the material so much. I do feel like I could still push my materials more and get more from them and see kind of the edges and the boundaries I could get these materials to. But I've really enjoyed how playful you can be with these materials and see what they'll do. I have learnt an awful lot, and there has been bits that have been hard, such as having to let go of preconceived ideas. I think that was one of the reasons why my first set of prototypes fell a bit flat and lacked some energy, because I had this idea in my brain about what I wanted them to be at the end, and that limited me that stopped my making process being as experimental as it could have been. So when I let go of that and went back and was re-inspired and used my research and used my printing in a different way, I created something so much more energetic and something that I feel I could still even go and develop on for a lot longer to come. And so actually letting go of the control of what my brain wanted to do or what I wanted to make made it so much easier. And I really enjoyed, I think one of the things I've really discovered and enjoyed is actually just to have time to make, just enjoying it and letting go of I've got to make this by the end of this, but actually just looking at what I could make and just enjoying the process and not knowing where it was going to go, just letting the materials kind of do the work and seeing what happens. And one of my really happy discoveries was actually completely accidental, to the point where I don't think I could recreate it in the same way again. But I was looking for plastic trays to mould from for the surface, to cast from, and I found some, and I accidentally poured hot water over them and completely changed the surface. It bubbled up and was almost completely unrecognisable, and decided to cast and mould from that, and created some of the most interesting samples that were bubbled and uneven and just completely wobbly. This was a plaster cast, but just to see how unusual it had become, and it was completely accidental and completely unique. And doing the similar thing with cement, that actually to see the real depth in here, and actually it's a very heavy sample, it feels very heavy and very chunky, but there's some really interesting, almost quite delicate parts to it, delicate ridges and marks for the surface that I couldn't get that again. And so some of my accidental moments have been really, really interesting, and that's where a lot of my playful side has come from. I've enjoyed just having a go, and I want to keep that mentality about me as I move forward. I've really, really developed my textiles language. I've really learned a lot about processes, about sample making, about using my research, but actually all in amongst that, textiles over the last year, for me this course has been my therapy at times. It's been something that I've really enjoyed doing and learnt a lot about, but enjoyed being able to make things, and enjoyed when some things in life have been challenging, it's actually been my time to sit and to make and to have a bit of time just enjoying that. So it's been all sorts of levels for me, this course. Learning a lot, really developing my own practice, developing my own personal voice, developing my techniques and my skills, but actually then allowing myself to have a bit of time to enjoy it and it become my passion as well. So I've really enjoyed MMT, and I'm looking forward to moving on and seeing what happens next.